The Secret Science at Work by Max Freedom Long. Chapter 8, Making the Prayer of Thought Form Clusters. The basic concept of prayer in Huna is contained in a number of words familiar and significant to one initiated into the lore, but lacking special meaning to an outsider. The cup, in quotes, that is filled to overflowing, is one of the excellent symbols because a cup can represent the thought form clusters of the thoughts which one makes use of in composing the prayer, which is to be made by the low and middle selves and sent telepathically along the aka cord to the high self. The filling of the cup symbolizes the answering of the prayer by the high self. Also, this allows a very good additional symbol of how it does the answering. In sending an accumulation of mana up along the aka cord to the high self to carry telepathically the thought forms which embody the prayer and make a cluster or cup, the mana is symbolized as water rising in a fountain. When it reaches the high self, it is changed to the form of mist or a cloud and is used to bring about the circumstances which will give the answer to the prayer. After the passage of sufficient time, the condition appears as a physical reality. This is symbolized as a downpouring of raindrops from the high self to fill the cup. In brackets, a fine use of this cup and rain symbol is to be found in the modern version of the tarot cards assembled by Waite, W-A-I-T-E, and referred to as the Pamela Smith set. Close bracket. In Egypt, and especially in India, the cup was replaced by the golden lotus, which is in itself a cup. Because the lotus rises from the pool on a long stem, this stands for the aka cord, and because it is floated on the water, this is a symbol of the low self mana. It serves well to illustrate the things necessary to prayer. The Huna meaning of the symbols became lost at some time or other, and in India today the lotus has other meanings, although the phrase, "Oh, the jewel in the lotus," used in mantrams, indicates the mana symbolized by the rain or dew falling in drops to fill the cup. The Kahunas in the dim ages made very sure that the cup symbol would not be mistaken. They did this by adding together the words for squirt water and for a cord to give ki aha, K-I-AHA, the word still used today for cup. The water squirted up the aka cord to the high self, is indicated in this symbol, is of course the surcharge of mana. The cord is the aka cord of connection. The cup itself is the matrix or mold or receptacle into which the high self symbolically pours the rain of blessings, the answer to the prayer, just as one pours material into a mold to cast an image. It is the repetition of these symbols used by the Kahunas which has made it possible to learn the secret lore at this late date. They use several symbols to cover the same meanings, as a rule, and in this way made certain that the secret contained in them should not be lost through changes in words or understanding. Whether or not the Kahunas were right in their firm conviction that the high self must be furnished with enough low mana to enable it to mold things or conditions on the level of the invisible future into answers, we cannot say without testing their beliefs to see if they are practical. The same may be said of their idea that the middle self must make the cup or thought form matrix as a preliminary step, that is, visualizing the conditions to be brought about before asking the high self to do its part. What we do know, however, quite beyond a doubt is that the kahunas thought and believed that they worked on as basic methods in prayer. Let me read that sentence again. What we do know, however, quite beyond a doubt, is what the kahunas thought and believed and what they worked on as basic methods in prayer. Their symbols, which they took such exceeding care to leave behind them in a high state of preservation, have guaranteed that. Another symbol which was used even oftener than that of the cup or the lotus was that of the seed, S-E-E-D. The thought forms were invisible and too small to be seen, veritable dust motes of thought, but they could be symbolized neatly as clusters of seeds which could be sent to the high self on a mana flow along the cord. Once a seed is planted, it must be watered and made to grow. The daily sending of a surcharge of mana to the high self was symbolized as water to nourish the seeds sent to the high self and planted in the invisible Garden of Eden, where all good fruits mature. But where there is one tree which bears the fruit of the carnal knowledge of evil, the complex, and if the fruit of this tree is put inside itself by the low self, there follows the expulsion from the garden, and the good fruit, the answer to the prayer, is no longer to be had and enjoyed. It is interesting to examine the hidden meanings which the kahunas placed in their word for seed, anano. Not only was this a seed in the ordinary sense, but in the roots it had the meaning of something which changed the state of things or changed the present conditions. This tells us exactly what the high self does when a prayer is sent to it. For instance, asking that an injured leg be healed. The mental picture of the leg in the healed condition is made and sent telepathically as a prayer, and this picture is the seed. It is also, according to one of the several meanings hidden in the word ano, A-N-O, a likeness or image of the desired condition. It is the meaning contained in the words of the prayer as they are spoken aloud, while the prayer is being sent at the same instant by the low self telepathically. It is something set apart for a special purpose, consecrated. This same word for seed also is the word for now, N-O-W, and because of this, we can understand the strange practice advised by Jesus. Ask, believing that ye have received it now. The seed is the mental picture of the thing desired, not the present imperfect condition. And the picture of the perfect or healed or corrected condition has to be seen as the perfect condition when the seed is being made. It is a now condition in the making. Or we might put it this way: one cannot make a picture of the injured leg and send it to the high self as the condition to be brought about. The desired future must be visualized as actually now present, even if only in the body of the thought form picture seed. The major work of the kahunas was to make prayers which would get answers, be it slowly or instantly. The word kahuna contains a root meaning that indicates the microscopic thought forms, which must be made as the first step in prayer. This meaning is that of fine particles as of dust. Dust is a good symbol because it rises when stirred and lifts as though on the way to the high self. The same root word also means to conceal. And this was the great secondary duty of all kahunas, the concealment of the secret lore. To get ready to make a prayer was a very important step. One had to decide with great care what to pray for, and one had to make as complete, detailed, and perfect a picture in mind as possible of the condition desired to be brought about. The picture would be real and perfect, and as perfected now, even though the condition might not arrive until a later time. Getting ready was called ho'ano, or making the seed, and it also had the meaning of solemnizing the mind, as in making ready to worship, and of beginning a daring venture. Prayer is the highest form of venture, if we are to accept the Huna view of it. In our HRA work, our first experiments with the making of the Huna type prayer brought to light the fact that the average person has almost no idea of how to go about producing a clear mental picture. Letters were sent as part of the record to tell what prayers were being offered. In about half of these, the sickness or other condition which was to be removed was included in the prayer, and so in the picture sent to the high self. In the case of a chronic ailment, such as a broken bone that refuses to knit properly, one does not pray, "Heal my injured leg," for the reason that the mention of the injury causes that to be part of the picture or seed. In a very short time, we began to go back to elementary things in order to learn to make a picture that contained only the desired condition, only the picture of the leg in perfect condition, now, that is, as existing now, in the picture seed cup state, as healed and perfect. In the picture seed cup state. So picture-seed-cup. In the picture seed cup state, as healed and perfect. This was very hard to do, it must be admitted, because in the memory of the low self, all memories connected with the injury to the leg and its injured condition were tied in with many associations or threads of aka substance. Even in making the new picture, one could only, with the greatest difficulty, avoid starting his thought train on anything except the injury in the leg. Our theosophists and those who had practiced the exercises in concentration, meditation, and contemplation had the advantage of those who had never taken time to practice the fine art of confining trains of ideas to one single track and making that track lead to one and only one goal. Any memory of a thing or event will contain its appearance, taste, smell, feel, temperature, place in time and space, and its rational relation to all connecting events. From this, we see that a good mental picture of the future condition should be made to have all these aspects. To learn how the mind works in this respect, one has but to pause for a moment and begin to recall the events of only a few hours past, or a week, month, or year past. The low self usually presents first the impressions made by the sense of sight. Then, along with the time-space setting, will come sounds, smells, tastes, feel, and so on. It will be observed that the visual image leads to all the rest. The eye is the most highly evolved of the sense organs, and it seems quite natural that sight images not only should come first, but also be favored by the low self as the communication method easiest to handle in telepathy. As we have pointed out in our discussions of telepathic communications between two persons, the sending of a mental picture has been found much simpler than the sending of an impression of sounds, even sounds symbolized in words. In our dreams, we will find that George habitually takes memories or thoughts or impressions of a number of events and changes them into terms of visual impressions. In this way, we will have a piano to represent music, a dog to represent the idea of the sound of barking and growling, a plate of food to stand for the satisfaction of tasting things, and so on. George also seems to believe that one picture is worth 1,000 words. In trying to learn what George had in mind in dreaming certain dream sequences, the psychoanalysts have long discovered that one does well to find out what the things are which have been thus changed into visual symbols. What this adds up to is the fact that the best way to settle down to the work of making the thought form clusters of the prayer is to use visual pictures for the framework. To these may be added such other sensory impressions as may be clearly and vividly imagined. Some of the things desired to be brought about through prayer lend themselves much better than others to the use of a variety of sensory images. A prayer for a bountiful meal would include almost all of the senses, while one for a night of sleep and profound deep sleep would not. Words to embody the picture of the thing prayed for should be selected with the greatest care and rehearsed ahead of time. So many words have several meanings, and George is apt to picture the wrong thing if a word appears to him to have a meaning unlike the one planned for the use by the middle self. If he follows the usual custom and makes visual images to replace the words, as in the case where one prays, "Give me health, wealth, and happiness," his symbol for health may turn out to be a prize fighter who has recently impressed him. A picture of wealth may be the money vaults of the bank on the next street, and his picture of happiness may be that of a neighbor's small dog wagging its tail ecstatically at the approach of its mistress. If these jumbled pictures are sent to the high self in the telepathic exchange, it is obvious that only a jumbled answer could be given, if any. To avoid such a failure, the picture of the health condition should be worked on carefully with the low self and long enough to result in a visual image of oneself in a state of perfect health, able to do and enjoy and accomplish the things that perfect health would make possible. In the same way, the pictures should be made definite and clear and to the point for wealth, as it applies to one individually, and happiness as it applies, in brackets, or in praying for another, a like procedure must be followed, close bracket. It is not for nothing that we have given such careful attention in the box practices and the use of the pendulum to get well acquainted with the low self and its vagaries. One cannot know his own George too well. This is illustrated in the report of a famous investigator of telepathy who tells of dividing his group into two parts and then sending half the group out of the room to confer and decide upon what should be visualized to be sent telepathically to the other half of the group. In one case, the group in conference went into the kitchen and looked about the objects on the mantel and elsewhere to select one to be used. A blue china plate was selected, but when the image of it was projected telepathically to the other half of the group, a surprising thing was observed. Not only the blue plate was picked up, but it was evident that the low selves of the sending group had also elected to send other things seen in the kitchen, the clock on the mantel, and a figurine at a distance from the blue plate, were seen and mentioned by the receivers, also a table with the chair beside it, and even a picture of a hunt scene on the wall. In later tests, it was found that by much and careful repeated concentration on a single object, the low selves were brought to understand that the one item was to be sent to the exclusion of what other things might have been observed in the room and which might have attracted the low selves. A mental house cleaning is needed, as the above example shows, to sweep aside and throw out the thought forms which get in the way of those things for which one plans to pray. In the same way that one takes his George into his confidence and explains ahead of time what is expected of him in the box or the pendulum exercises, or in accumulating a surcharge of mana and using it, one must have a sufficient number of heart-to-heart talks with the low self to explain in detail every step of the prayer method which is proposed to use. It is taken for granted that each one of us has some desire, some hidden yearning towards better conditions that he feels he cannot bring about without help. Before formulating a prayer, it is imperative that he take a straight, reasoning look at that desire. If it materializes as an answer to his prayer, it might easily entail added responsibilities, which, when thought over carefully, might impress one as being too heavy to bear. The larger the blessing, the heavier the responsibility is often the rule. Health may be the cheapest in terms of responsibility, although most of us, when we pray for health, are faced with doing something strenuous as our part of bringing about the health condition. We may have to exercise more and eat less, and the majority of people prefer mediocre health to having to help God help oneself in this manner. Sanity and normalcy are needed in deciding what one may ask for in prayer. The logical middle self cannot believe for a moment that there is a single chance that the moon will be given as a gift in answer to prayer, and what we cannot logically believe to be both possible and probable will not be given. Disbelief prevents making of the perfect picture of the requesting thing as given in our hands here and now. Also, what the middle self cannot logically accept as a belief, the low self will certainly not accept. Its belief is the substance of faith, and if it disbelieves, it will ruin the prayer picture even before it sends it to the high self. As faith will be mentioned frequently as we go along, it may well be at this point to explain that to the Huna initiates, faith was not just the act of complete believing. The word for faith in the sacred language is mana io, MANA-A-I-O. Its first meaning is to believe, but the literal meanings as seen in the roots are: number 1, to use a surcharge of mana, in brackets, root mana plus root io, the latter meaning excess and pointing to the surcharge or excess of mana. Number 2, to call for a desired thing and to reach out or extend as the hand to touch something. This shows that one must reach out along the aka cord to touch the high self in order to ask for the thing desired. In brackets, all from the root O. Number 3, to be real, or with causative hoo, H-O-O, to cause to become real. In brackets, root io, I-O, close bracket. Quote, faith if it hath not works, is dead. Close quote. Faith, if it has not works, is dead. Becomes clear when we know that the works part includes the sending of the mana surcharge to the high self as part of the overall work of having the prayer made into a reality. An excellent practice when formulating a prayer is to imagine oneself projected ahead in time into the conditions for which we plan to ask. It will be discovered that a number of obligations appear. If one asks for a new car, then projects oneself into the future and takes over the car, starts to drive and pay for its upkeep and money, it may be seen that the money for the upkeep must be included in the request for the car. This, in its turn, demands that one ask for a means of earning more money, and greater earnings demand greater efforts and expenditures of time. One of the HRAs, who has written in to say that she and her young husband had decided, after careful consultation, to ask for a 6-room house with nice furnishings and with a fine, large car in the garage, ended by asking for a comfortable apartment in a convenient location and a good used car. They got both. They were very happy with them, and they had little trouble meeting the modest bills as they came in. In Honolulu, one of the HRAs decided to try to help a young man who had lost the use of his legs through polio. The two agreed upon a plan to ask restoration of the legs and eagerly began practicing to make the prayers as they should be made. All went well, and the useless legs began to tingle and show signs of returning strength. Then the young man suddenly became panicked by the thought of having to get out and make his own living. He gave way to fear, and overnight his legs were back in the old useless condition. He had neglected to project himself into the future as a daily preliminary exercise to get used to the idea again of assuming obligations of health and normalcy. It was never learned, which was the more dismayed at the discovery that he was being healed, his middle self or his low self. The man who shoulders his full responsibility in life, and this is the man always standing ready to help others, has perhaps the clearest path to the high self, because through his feeling that he has done all he can, he has the essential confidence and faith in asking help in the things he cannot do. Once, when riding a remote trail in Wyoming, I came upon a lone man crouched behind a fence mending it, and, as far as I could see, talking to himself. I drew up and said something like, "It gets so you have to talk to yourself out here, doesn't it?" He stood up, grinning, and explained, "Not exactly, but I've got so I pray a lot out here. I was praying the horses wouldn't get out." I said, "And mending the fence at the same time." "Yep," he told me. "That's the best way to pray, seems to me. Can't leave the fences down and then ask God to keep the horses in." Another thing to be thought over before making the prayer: the high self is never party to a theft. If you ask to be given your neighbor's house, you will not get it. If you ask for another just like it without expecting to make the necessary effort towards getting it, remember that it takes labor of many men for many days to make such a house. It is more than probable that the high selves of the laborers and the builders would not be willing to see their men robbed of their pay so that another could possess a house simply for the asking. If there is any law that we can deduce by the simple act of looking around us, it is that as one sows, so one reaps. No sowing, no reaping. I have repeatedly encountered the attitude which says, in effect, that God has everything in abundance and therefore should give each of us everything he wants for the asking. This is generally accompanied by a resentful unwillingness to take care of oneself or to make any effort to contribute to the welfare of others, and accompanied often by a jealousy of the good luck observed in the lives of other people. This is a belief that is denied by all the experiences of daily life, and an individual who holds it will indeed have trouble getting his prayer acted upon by a high self who knows that this man has not earned and does not deserve the benefits for which he prays. When, after careful consideration of everything related to the matter, one has decided upon the exact things to be prayed for, at least insofar as the middle self reasoning is concerned, one should consult the low self seriously about the decision. One explains everything to George, giving the reasons why this or that would be good. It may be well to explain why earlier ideas were given up. The future should be described in the most glowing terms possible to convince George that the things to be asked for are good to have. With this priming of George, one then relaxes physically and mentally, inviting George to go along while one imagines the prayers answered and the new life in the new conditions being enjoyed. In this exercise lies the opportunity to watch, as through closed eyes, what the low self does, how it reacts when no pressure is brought to bear on it, to like or dislike the life in the picture which is visualized. The little vagrant waftings of emotions of like and dislike, worry and contentment, pleasure, fear, etc., will be the signals which show the reaction of the low self. If there seems to be an irrational emotional reaction to some condition that the middle self considers desirable, it may be possible to talk the matter over with the low self, visiting aloud and explaining in detail why the disliked or disturbing imagined condition would be really very good. When well advanced in the practice and after contact and confidence has been established between the two selves, it may be possible to ask, does this situation remind you of something that bothered you once before? Can you give me a picture or a recollection of what that was? By waiting, relaxed, the low self may push into focus of the common center of consciousness the very thing that caused the original disturbed reaction. If this happens, it can then be discussed, and it may be pointed out with patient arguments and examples that the imagined future situation and the old one are quite different, and that nothing in the old situation should be laid at the door of the new. The final consideration in planning is to make the prayer in its relation to others around one, relatives, friends, business associates if involved, even business or social rivals. If one prays for his own good fortune, he has his own high self waiting to help him. If he prays for the good fortune of the family group, he enlists the high selves of the entire family. If he plans and prays for the betterment of a larger group, he soon, if he works hopefully and strongly in the chosen direction, will have the help of the Poe Amakua, Poeaumakua, or the Great Company of High Selves. The same principle holds true if one plans to ask for help to do something that may work an injury or hardship on others. in which case the help of the high selves of others may be turned to active obstruction. The love of the high selves for their man is the perfect and selfless love of the higher level. No matter how low and backward a man may be in the evolutionary scale, his high self longs to see him learn life's lessons and make progress. Help given unselfishly to one of the least of these will enlist the help of the high self of the unfortunate man. As insects learn the lesson of the hive, so mankind learns that by combining and working for the mutual good which is to be gained, there is strength through uniting and serving the common interest in family, in tribe, and in nations. We still have not learned to work together as nations, but that lesson is the next one up. Any prayer which includes good for others has its chances of being answered multiplied manyfold. A word must be said about the widespread belief that one must not pray for material things. In the major religions of India, the belief in karma prohibits the desire for material things, even for life itself. Prayer as we know it is not used. It would make more bad karma and bind one tightly to the wheel of rebirth. The individual tries to escape from life by ceasing to desire anything. Karma, as most readers may know, is an ancient religious doctrine joined with the belief in reincarnation or successive physical lives. In it, the accumulation of good or bad, as earned in past lives, determines the conditions of succeeding lives. The kahunas of the Bible and those in Polynesia may be identified as products of the same initiation because they took exactly the same stand on such matters as karma and reincarnation. If they were aware of the ideas then current in India, it is plain to see that they rejected the belief in almost endless trains of incarnations. They concentrated their attention on the problem of living the earthly life in the moment with the help of the high self in the best possible way. While they believed in an afterlife in the realm of spirit, it was taken for granted that a life well lived on earth would result in fortunate conditions after death. Because of the loss of knowledge of the way to make a Huna prayer, and because of the subsequent failure to get sufficient results through the use of prayers, there arose in Christianity a doctrine of hopelessness, in which it was taught that the ills of earthly life were to be borne with patience and resignation, while every effort was to be made to ensure a happier life in heaven. The Kahunas believed it to be right, as well as possible, to have a good and happy life both here and hereafter. The words seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. These words, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you, have been misconstrued because Huna meanings behind these words and others like them were unknown. This misunderstanding, which tripped up so many HRAs when they started to think about making ready to pray, must be cleared for everyone. In the ancient lore, the kingdom of God or of heaven is the high self symbolized as a higher plane. In a like manner, the kingdom of earth is occupied by the low self with its companion middle self. To seek the kingdom means 1, to learn that there is a high self. 2, to come to a rational belief in its existence and in the fact that it is willing and able to help us. Number 3, to learn by practice to cause the low self to contact the high self by means of the aka chord and to present the mana and the prayer. In the simple words of Huna, one may say, first learn to contact the high self in its level above you, and if you can do this successfully, your prayers can be delivered, and all things which you can gain through the use of prayer will be given you. John the Baptist cried out that the kingdom of heaven was at hand. It is obvious that he did not mean that the higher levels had come down to mingle with the lower levels. What he meant as a kahuna was that the high self was close at hand, waiting for us to make the contact with it. But, warned John, it was necessary to repent one's sins before the contact could be made. We must never forget that the making of amends for hurts done others is necessary before we can be rid of the feelings that we are unworthy to face the high self, before the low self will give up its sense of shame and face the high self across the length of the aka chord. The old idea that one should give up living the normal life or should sit with folded hands expecting God to know what we need and to supply our wants is emphatically not Huna, nor is it rational or even tinged with common sense. We are not put here to bend all our efforts towards getting out of the earthly life without living it and learning by our experience. We are put here to live and love and grow and progress. Exercise develops muscles. Use develops the intellect. We have been given free will to be used, not to be discarded while we try to lay the responsibility for living entirely upon the high self. And that concludes Chapter 8. Chapter 9 is entitled Contacting the High Self and Presenting the Prayer.